In the meantime, we have to show you our show animation because it has our names on it. That's very important. The race to the White House now in the home stretch with Election Day exactly 2 weeks from today. Good morning to you. I'm John Scott.
Here we are, 2 weeks. 2 weeks, everybody.
It's been a long, strange road.
It has certainly been, and there's a lot more to watch in the next 14 days.
To the Democrats now. They are out in full force in several battlegrounds today. As we mentioned, Hillary Clinton also in the Sunshine State of Florida, holding a rally in Coconut Creek this afternoon. But getting underway now in North Carolina, where his wife holds a very slim lead. Bill Clinton is holding an early voting event in Rocky Mount. Joe Biden will soon be appearing at a rally at Chatham University in Pennsylvania. That taking place just minutes from now. Joining us now, Eliana Johnson, Washington editor of the National Review, and Annie Linsky, national political reporter for the Boston Globe. When you hear that list of names of luminaries, really, Annie, that's the advantage that Team Clinton has this time around. They can send Joe Biden, they can send Bill Clinton, they can send people like Elizabeth Warren, whom we saw yesterday, to some of those states to really try to drum up Democratic support.
Yeah, that's right. And add Michelle Obama to that list.
Sure.
Yeah,
you can add President Obama. You can add the most powerful man in the world to that list if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, that is her big advantage. She has this huge amount of surrogates. I was talking to Brian Fallon, her press secretary, out at the debate, and they pointed out that they can have a surrogate in every single swing state on every single day. So it's a real force multiplier for her campaign.
Eliana, Donald Trump is out with his own electoral map, and I want to put it on screen so our viewers can take it in. He suggests that he is not going to have any problems in some of those states. Well, the red states are the Trump states. He suggests that Arizona, Georgia, South Carolina, not going to be a problem for him. The blue states, you can clearly see that he expects will go for Hillary Clinton. But then some of the states in yellow are the toss-ups, places like Colorado, North Carolina, Virginia, even Pennsylvania and Michigan. That is what Trump predicts as the electoral map right now. How do you see his prediction?
His predictions are really interesting, John, in that some of the toss-up states he has on there, I would put Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Colorado. Most polls do not show those states still being competitive. Hillary Clinton has led in every recent poll of those states, and so I would not count those as toss-up states. I would actually say those states lean Democratic. I think he also has Virginia as a toss-up state. So, and I think the Fox electoral map also has those as leaning Democratic. So I think the Trump map, not surprisingly, is incredibly charitable to him, and it's not very likely to pan out like that on Election Day.
Annie, what do you think about this map? Is he looking at this map through rose or red colored glasses?
It's not a map that the polling supports. I mean, look, we're looking at a situation where Hillary Clinton has expanded her map so broadly that Utah is on the map. And even, you know, and this is absurd, but even Texas, she's only 2 or 3 points down. So I think it's a little bit difficult to see the path that Donald Trump is laying out as reasonable or realistic. That
said, he is promising that this election is going to be a whole lot closer than most people suggest, and he's going to win states, Eliana, that people don't think he's going to win.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. He's been saying that he's really has some contradictory messages that to me have been confusing. On the one hand, he's saying that the election is rigged against him, and on the other hand, he's saying that he's going to surprise people and come out of nowhere and win states that the polls really show him having no chances of winning. So I'm not sure how Trump reconciles these two messages in his mind, or how he actually expects voters to reconcile them in their minds when he's trying to get them out to the polls now. In many states, people are doing early voting, or on Election Day.
Washington Post and New York Times are both out today with articles that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are going to be pushing Hillary Clinton with a more leftward agenda, assuming she wins the White House. How do you see those articles? How do you see those pushes affecting voters when they go to the booth? Let's start with you, Annie.
Hi, yeah, I was out with Elizabeth yesterday as well in New Hampshire, and the left is particularly energized this year. I mean, they feel that this election is almost over, and they are not going to give Hillary Clinton much of a honeymoon. I mean, they're ready to continue to keep pressure on her the day after the election. And so, how is that going to affect voters? I mean, I think the voters I was talking to yesterday in New Hampshire were just, excited Democrats, and they were happy to have their party united, and they were excited to see two of the party's biggest stars on one stage. But I think that the, not only the, aides to Sanders and Warren that we talked to, but also the heads of the left-leaning groups are saying that they are going to just keep this pressure on something that they didn't do in 2008, and they saw a lot of appointments that came out of Treasury appointments that came out of Citibank and some of the bigger banks, and the left is not going to stand for that this time, and they're going to do something that they learned a lesson 8 years ago. It also speaks to the extent that they feel that the election is sort of wrapping up.
Does that, Eliana, become an issue that Trump can use in the waning days of this campaign as an issue?
What I think is so interesting, John, is the reason the left didn't do that in 2008 is that the left backed Obama over Hillary Clinton, and this year they backed Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton. So the left has never viewed Hillary Clinton as their candidate. Now that view has been buttressed by WikiLeaks disclosures that she's called environmentalists, people who need to get a life. And so I think they're going to treat her very much as a Republican president and pull her to the left, hammer her, and she's going to be squeezed not only from Republicans on the right, but from environmentalists and activists on the left, and will have absolutely no honeymoon period if she's elected.
We didn't even get into the discussion of what's happening to Obamacare. That's another issue. Annie Linsky, Eliana Johnson, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with just 2 weeks to go until Election Day, both candidates are focusing on the all-important battlegrounds. We're going to be taking a closer look at Colorado and its 9 electoral votes next. Also, we want to hear from you. Will newly confirmed problems with Obamacare hurt Democrats' chances in the presidential election? Our live chat is up and running. What do you think about those rate increases coming? Go to foxnews.com/happeningnow to join the conversation.
A Fox News alert and a British Airways flight from San Francisco to London made an emergency landing in Vancouver last night after all the crew members became ill. Airline officials say 25 people, including 3 pilots, were admitted to hospitals as a precaution, but have all been treated and have all been released. The flight was carrying about 400 passengers when it was diverted. Initial reports blamed smoke inhalation for the incident, but officials have not confirmed that.
Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are now focusing on the battlegrounds. One of them is Colorado. The latest poll average from Real Clear Politics puts Hillary Clinton ahead of Donald Trump there by more than 7 points. Colorado turned into a battleground when Barack Obama campaigned there. He won the state in 2008 and 2012. Let's bring in John Frank, political reporter for the Denver Post. Is Colorado still considered a swing state, or is it solidly blue after voting for Barack Obama in consecutive elections?
Colorado is solidly a battleground state, and it's likely to remain that way. Our demographics are changing. That did help the Obama campaign in both 2008 and 2012. We're seeing an influx of young voters. So we've got many more millennials. We also are seeing an increase in Latino voters. These two demographics, of course, lean toward Democrats, and it's giving them good hope in the state. You're seeing Hillary Clinton with a commanding lead in the polls, though that is likely to tighten. We're going to see Donald Trump in town likely this weekend. Governor Pence is coming on Wednesday. The Trump campaign is making a serious effort to keep Colorado from going blue this election, and they need it if they're going to win.
Millennials have not been a group that have been particularly enamored of Hillary Clinton so far this election.
That's true, and Colorado is a perfect example of that. We went for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic caucuses back in March. And Clinton's campaign has worked very hard to bring those Bernie folks on board. I was at a Bernie Sanders rally just a week or two ago, and he is still energizing this base. And a number of the folks I talked to said they're considering voting third party rather than Hillary Clinton. The size of that portion is really what's going to determine whether this is a close race or not. Polls are showing Democrats going toward Libertarian and even to some extent Green Party candidate because they're not satisfied with either choice for that matter.
Well, it's my recollection that in the Republican primary, Ted Cruz won it all, and Donald Trump said some pretty nasty things about the Republican organization in Colorado. Is that water under the bridge, or are there still some hurt feelings there?
For many Republicans, it is now water under the bridge. You're seeing a number of the leaders of the party coalesce behind Trump. But I will say it's still a significant issue for some of the conservative activists. You remember back to the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. Colorado was the core of the Never Trumpers, the folks that staged the walkout protest. And in talking to some of those folks who did walk out, they're not going to vote for Trump. And the latest revelations about alleged sexual advances and so forth are only confirming what they knew all along, is that Trump was not the best nominee for the Republican Party. So that's a serious question for Republicans.
There was one opinion piece in your paper that suggested that Colorado could be the Ohio of this year, could be the state that determines who wins this election. Do you see it that way?
Turnout is going to be the big question here in Colorado. But there's no question the Trump campaign is putting significant resources into the state. That's why you're seeing Pence and Trump come within a week. Mr. Trump has been here numerous times in recent months, and he's really rallying the base, appearing in Colorado Springs, the conservative bedrock of our state, as well as trying to chip away the Rust Belt of Colorado, down in Pueblo, where we have, a history of steel mills and so forth. That's another place to watch to see whether he can make inroads. So far, the early ballot returns suggest he's not making huge inroads. Democrats are up in the early first mail ballot returns, though, of course, these are still very preliminary numbers.
All right. It is going to be fascinating to watch. Thanks very much for sharing your insights.
My pleasure.
A Fox News alert, and here's what our Ed Henry is flagging for our attention. The latest information from WikiLeaks. You might recall that it was March of 2015 that the world found out that Hillary Clinton was using a private email server and not her State Department address. Well, Cheryl Mills, who was chief of staff at the State Department, sends out an email to a number of people inside the Hillary Clinton orbit that says this: we need to clean this up. He, meaning the president, President Obama, has emails from her. They do not say state.gov. This after President Obama went on 60 Minutes, and also in a separate interview to Bill Plant of CBS, he said he learned about the private email server from news reports. Cheryl Mills obviously went into damage control mode there, saying, we've got to clean this up. He has emails from her. In other words, the president should have known. That is going to be the matter of some discussion, you would imagine, on Capitol Hill. What the president told the world versus what he may have known or perhaps should have known. Again, Ed Henry's working on it. One of the latest WikiLeaks releases from John Podesta's email server. A Fox News alert, and the new electoral map is just out from the Fox News election team. There you see the solid red states that Donald Trump is projected to win. Solid blue states are obviously Hillary Clinton Democrat states. The lighter blue are leaning Democrat. And that's where the bad news comes in for Donald Trump. States like Colorado, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, all states that Trump has said he can win are leaning Democrat at this point. Iowa is a state that has gone from lean Republican to toss-up in our latest Fox News election scorecard. If I'm adding the numbers up correctly, Donald Trump has his work cut out for him. 182 states are solidly, 182 electoral votes, I should say, are solidly in the Democratic camp. If you add in the lean Democratic states or electoral votes, we're talking about 307 solid or leaning Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump has his work cut out for him, but he says that he can still win on Election Day. We'll obviously keep our eye on all of this.
We'll take a look at that electoral map again as we take in this big headline from Obamacare today. The White House admitting insurance premiums will soar by an average of 25% next year. On top of that, many customers will only be able to pick plans from one insurer. Supporters say the plans will be more expensive, but many consumers will not be impacted because they receive subsidies. However, there are millions and millions of Americans not eligible for this help, and that raises some interesting questions on the timing of this news and the impact on the election. Joining me now, Brad Blakeman, former Deputy Assistant to President George W. Bush, and Julian Epstein, former Chief Counsel for the House Judiciary Committee, former Staff Director of the House Government Reform Committee. It's nice to have you both. Let's talk timing.
Morning.
Right, timing is everything, Brad. Open enrollment begins November 1, and the public's really going to get a look at how this news, this headline, will impact them personally. Is it a game changer for this election?
It could be. When you talk about the millions upon millions of people who are going to their mailbox only to receive another bad news from the Obama administration. I got my notice the other day. My premium's going up $120 a month, no reason given. Every year it's gone up, and when it initially started, my premium was larger than what I had been paying, and I wasn't paying a deductible of $6,000. So this is really a tax on the middle class. They can least afford it. A family of four will have now a deductible somewhere in the neighborhood of $14,000 before their insurance coverages kick in. So my suggestion to Donald Trump is have your supporters bring their notices to your rally. Hold them up. Show the press. Read the notices, and you'll understand how systemic the failure of Obamacare is.
Julian, what do you think? Do you think this is potentially a game changer for what we see as a lead by Hillary Clinton at this point in the electoral map?
I think it'll have close to zero impact on the election, largely because of the fact that the Republicans, and particularly Donald Trump, haven't tried to prosecute this issue. They've been talking about Donald Trump's problems with women, the fact that he wouldn't accept the results of the election. He hasn't really prosecuted this argument. So I think there's very little likelihood it'll have an impact. If you look at the polls actually show the public split on Obamacare. About 44% for it, 47% don't like it. But of the 47% that don't like it, a lot of people don't like it because they wanted a law that was stronger than Obamacare. The fact of the matter is while premiums are increasing, in fact, for people that are in the individual market, a Brookings study came out recently that nobody has disputed, showed that the actual premium increases were going up and would be much higher without Obamacare. And under Obamacare, these premium increases are only going to affect people that are in the individual markets. Most Americans get their insurance by employer-based systems, so you're only talking about 15% of the public that are going to be affected, and most of the people in the individual market are going to be eligible for a subsidy. So it's a very small swath of voters that are impacted.
Interesting point. You say, though, that Donald Trump hasn't been talking about it or prosecuting this. He is talking about it today, and that's why I asked the question about the timing. If he focuses on this for the next 14 days, what the impact will be. Here's what he had to say on America's Newsroom about his proposed solution for this issue.
Healthcare savings accounts are phenomenal. You get rid of the borderlines between states, which has to be done because right now the insurance companies have monopolies, which is what they wanted. And frankly, it should have been done last time, but Obama got a lot of money from the insurance companies, so he didn't do it. But you have now competition. If you do that, you'll have tremendous competition. And we will have plans that are so good and plans that people aren't even thinking about right now. They'll be tailor-made. They'll be phenomenal and much less expensive.
Using Julian's words, Brad, is Donald Trump prosecuting in the right way to have an impact?
I think he's going to start. And remember, the notices just are being received now by the American public, so the timing couldn't be better. It's totally bad news, Obamacare. The Democrats instituted Obamacare. Why? Because they knew it eventually would fall on its own and they'd move to a single-payer system. Now, if you like the Department of Motor Vehicles, you're going to love a single-payer system because you're going to come to a place, take a number, sit down, see a doctor who's never saw you before, and I'll never see you again. This is not the type of socialized medicine Americans deserve. We need a market-based Obamacare system that caters to the individual.
Well, it's a serious,
and I think Trump can institute that as president.
It's a scary scenario, Julian. I wonder about that, about the scenario that Brad maps out. If that fear would be enough to provoke people to vote in one way or the other. But at the same time, you do have more Americans with insurance than before, in part because of Obamacare. So is it a wash?
That's exactly correct. You have the uninsured rate at lower than 9% now. More than 21 million Americans have gotten coverage. And again, while premiums are increasing, they're probably increasing slower than they would without Obamacare. So if you look at that data, it looks to be a wash for the election. If you look at the data in terms of the public is pretty much split on Obamacare, but actually either for the public, there's a majority that's either for Obamacare or for something stronger. So that doesn't seem to inure well for the Republicans. The ideas that Donald Trump is talking about in terms of competition, taking down the state barriers, that was an idea put out by Rudy Giuliani. It got no traction in Republican primaries in 2012. So there doesn't seem to be that much there. But even if there was, the map that you just put up before this segment that showed Hillary Clinton having well over 300 electoral votes, and that number is probably going high, particularly with the enthusiasm rates dropping for Republicans, going up for Democrats right now. It just seems like a very lame last-minute Hail Mary pass by Donald Trump to get off subject matter that has been very unfavorable for him, that has seen his polls
just to set the record,
plummet.
though,
So it just doesn't change the This
is information put out by the government. So this is not even something that's just a campaign issue.
Correct.
The government's putting forward these statistics, and it is the reality for many Americans. So we'll see.
Absolutely.
Brad,
but Donald Trump's ability to exploit this is almost zero because he's had such a feckless campaign.
Well, we'll see. Brad, I'm sure you disagree with that. I'll give you the first.
I disagree wholeheartedly. This is bad news. It's government bad news, and the American people don't care about Obamacare. What they do care about is their children and getting the proper health care.
Well, here we see the stark contrast between both campaigns and their platforms, and that is interesting. We'll see which one wins out. Brad, Julian, great to have you both. Thank you.
Thanks.
Jenna, thanks for having us.
General Motors reports record third quarter earnings, even though some of its sales are falling. The automaker earning doubled what it made during the same time last year. Fox Business Network's Cheryl Kasuni explains how the company came out on top. Cheryl.
Yeah, John. Well, overall markets are coming off, we should say. Yesterday's merger news, that was thanks to Time Warner and AT&T. But we got a negative tone today. Part of the reason is, of course, GM. Now, despite the fact that home prices jumping more than 5% in August, it's all about those earnings. And General Motors, one of the stocks in the red right now. Here's the problem. Profits doubled for GM. Their truck sales were strong in North America, both pickups, SUVs, all selling well. And that redesigned Chevy Malibu is doing well. But it's what's happening overseas that traders are hitting the sell button on. That news today, you got the fallout from Britain's exit from the EU, causing their sales in Europe to be weak. Now, we're also watching shares of Under Armour. That stock's taking a big old tumble right now. The sportswear company's stock down more than 14%. That's the biggest decline in 8 years for it. Investors seem to be freaked out about the amount of money they want to spend to expand. They want to open more retail stores, sponsor more athletes, and push further into the footwear market. But apparel sales are forecast to slow. So where are they going to get the money? Apple is out after the bell today. There's a lot of optimism that Samsung's massive Galaxy Note 7 recall is actually going to push customers to the iPhone. Analysts also seem to think the iPhone 7 launch is going to be a positive despite slower iPhone sales in general. And then finally, all eyes are on Twitter this week. Now, they don't report earnings until Thursday, guys, but there are reports they plan to lay off 300 workers this week. That's about 8% of their workforce. That stock is down 40% over the last year. It's down more than 3% today. They've been trying to find a buyer. No luck there. And while it's really a popular fun site, monetizing those eyeballs proven to be a big problem. So that's it from Fox Business right now. I'm going to send it back to @JohnScottFNC, @JennaLeeUSA.
All right.
Your Twitter news. Back to you.
Thanks very much, Cheryl Kasuni.
Well, breaking news on the battle to retake Mosul and what it might mean for our own national security. A new piece in the Wall Street Journal reporting the offensive highlights the risk of fighters fleeing elsewhere, saying, quote, U.S. and European officials said they have not changed their assessment that as Islamic State loses territory, young men who traveled from Europe to fight with the group will seek to return. The Mosul attack may inspire radical people to act or eventually return more fighters to Europe, said a U.S. official. Here now with more on this, Tom Johnson, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, senior editor of the Long Word Journal. So the image that comes to mind is poking a hornet's nest, right? You start poking that nest and suddenly the hornets go elsewhere. What do you think is the real risk of the battle in Mosul having impact in Europe and even closer to home?
Well, I think you could certainly see this sort of reverse flow of foreign fighters, both from Iraq and Syria, as Islamic State continues to lose ground. But keep in mind, they've already infiltrated throughout Europe with foreign fighters. So there's already that growing threat. The threat's been there now for 18 months, however long. The bottom line, too, is that they're also using foreign fighters to defend Mosul. So they deployed Chechen fighters, for example. The Chechen commanders were deployed south of Mosul earlier this year to basically draw the defensive lines. And other foreign fighters from other countries have been deployed as well. You know, in the last 24 hours, the Islamic State has come out and said that 58 suicide attacks have been committed around Mosul as they try and defend the city. Now, we can't independently confirm that statistic, but it sounds about right. And probably a good number of those suicide bombers are, in fact, foreign fighters.
I'm so curious about your assessment of what's happening in Mosul based on what we know from social media, because I know that's something you look at closely. Obviously, you look at what ISIS is putting out as propaganda. What's your sense of what Mosul means?
Well, I mean, it means a lot to the Islamic State. Remember, they've been telling everybody for years now that this is part of the caliphate. For a couple of years, this has been one of the great seats of the so-called caliphate, and losing it would be a big blow to the organization. They will continue to fight on, even if they lose it, though, and we've talked about this in the past, where they have an incredible insurgency capability. They were a guerrilla army before they were anything else, and so they'll just return to those tactics. And also, we've seen that they've been able to lash out at the West, that they have this capability to hit the West and commit terrorist attacks. And one of the things we've discovered is that they basically improvised this system where they remote control terrorists in Europe.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about
Sure.
that, because we see the map, we see how close Mosul is to Turkey, you know how close Turkey is to Europe, but you say even just looking at the physical map is less important than this remote controlled strategy they might have.
Well, I would say
What is that?
they're equally important. It's two different ways of doing it. One way of doing it is, of course, send foreign fighters back to Europe to commit attacks. Another way to do it is digitally. What they've done is they've set up this system where basically ISIS supporters or people who want to go fight for ISIS but can't make it can basically commit an attack in their home country by corresponding with an operative online. This handler walks them through their attack. And I'll give you a great example of this. In Ansbach, Germany, this last summer, there was an Afghan refugee teenager who wanted to support ISIS. To the moment he walked onto a train where he hacked the passengers with a machete, the moment right before that, he was actually corresponding with an ISIS handler via probably his phone or a computer or something along those lines, and was actually saying, okay, I'm going to begin now. That's how much remote control this can be. And this is very interesting because these are small-scale attacks, they're not big operations, but what the quiet part of this war is that the U.S. and European officials have been trying to fight these remote control terrorists.
It's a buddy system.
It's a buddy system. It's a very interesting way of improvising on some problems. You know, they know that even though they've been able to infiltrate Europe with foreign fighters and something along those lines, there's still a pool of would-be supporters who maybe their travel is limited. And this is a great way to try and help them.
I didn't get to Al-Qaeda. I always like to ask you about Al-Qaeda. Just any quick thought. I only have about 30 seconds.
Well,
but because we're focusing so much on ISIS, I don't want to forget what's
over and over again, I tell everybody Al-Qaeda is still alive. It's growing. It has grown. It's not dead. And ISIS did not succeed in the global jihad.
So we have to remember that. Right. I always just want to make sure we keep our perspective very global when we look at terror. Tom, great to have you. Thank you. John. Well, legal marijuana use is becoming more widespread in the United States, raising fears that more people are driving under the influence. And now scientists and researchers are developing breathalyzer tests to detect impaired driving. Voters in California will be deciding in 2 weeks whether to legalize recreational marijuana. All the more reason to cover this story. Claudia Cowan's live in California with more. Claudia?
Well, Jenna, with medical marijuana legal in half the U.S. and recreational use allowed in 5 states and now on the ballot in 5 others, police are counting on the tech sector to develop tools that can detect whether a driver is stoned. And 2 tests being developed here in the Bay Area are getting a lot of buzz.
Right now, there's really not a good tool for officers to measure if someone has been consuming marijuana.
But Tyler Schultz and his fellow researchers at Stanford University are working to change that and demonstrated their prototype spit test that just needs a swab of saliva.
We just plunge this into the well that holds the chip.
Their portable device uses magnetic biosensors previously used to screen for cancer to detect the presence of THC, the potent ingredient in marijuana that can impair a driver's reaction time.
We believe that this will save lives of innocent people and the drivers themselves.
You blow into this like that?
At Hound Labs, a startup in Oakland, CEO Mike Lynn demos a breathalyzer that measures the amount of THC in a person's breath.
By measuring THC in breath, where it only stays for a few hours at the very most, we can identify drivers who are actually stoned at the time that they're pulled over.
As opposed to someone whose car may smell like pot, but who isn't actually high. And unlike blood alcohol tests that can measure whether a driver is drunk in legal terms, there is no national standard to correlate THC levels to whether someone is driving stoned. Law enforcement and policymakers still need to work that out. But Jenna, scientists and researchers are not waiting. They are field testing these devices so that by a time a national legal impairment level is established, some kind of roadside THC test will be standard police equipment.
Claudia, thank you.
Florida, with its 29 electoral votes, considered a must-win state for Donald Trump. Earlier today, he met with Cuban Americans in Miami as he crisscrosses the state and pushes a new attack on Obamacare.
My plan also includes repealing and replacing Obamacare. A disaster. And in case you haven't heard today's news, it's just been announced that Americans are going to experience yet another double-digit spike in your premium for Obamacare, and it doesn't work.
Well, Hillary Clinton is also heading to Florida right now, where early voting is well underway.
Steve Harrigan's live in Coconut Creek, Florida, following the Clinton campaign. Steve?
Jenna, they started lining up here outside of Broward College 5 hours before the doors were open to see Hillary Clinton at this Get Out the Early Vote rally. Both candidates, of course, stumping through Florida today, fighting for the state's 29 electoral votes. Already 1.6 million people have voted in Florida, and a couple of important figures as far as that goes. 4 years ago in the early voting, the Republicans had a clear advantage of 5 percentage points. So far this time around, it's pretty much dead even between registered Republicans and Democrats voting early. One other figure to keep an eye on, that is the early Latino vote. It's higher, 90% higher than it was just 4 years ago. In most polls, Hillary Clinton is leading by 3 to 4 percentage points, and one big question being raised, how could that affect other down-ballot races in Florida, especially that of Republican Senator Marco Rubio, who's facing a challenge from Democratic Congressman Patrick Murphy. Most polls right now still have Rubio holding on to a slim 2 percentage point lead. Jen and John, back to you.
Steve, thank you.
Meantime, it's a very tight race playing out now in Arizona, where a new Monmouth University poll has Donald Trump leading Hillary Clinton by just 1 point, 46 to 45%. Arizona, at one time solidly in the red column, is now considered a toss-up. Let's talk about it with Caitlin Huey-Burns, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Aaron Blake is a senior politics reporter for The Washington Post. Donald Trump put out, the Trump campaign put out an electoral map, Caitlin, and it shows Arizona solidly red. He says he's going to win Arizona and a number of these other states like Georgia that have been sort of heading toward the toss-up category.
Right, but the fact that Arizona is a toss-up race at this point really speaks to the uphill battle that Donald Trump will have getting to 270. If you look at the Real Clear Politics polling averages, and if you look at the electoral map as it stands, Hillary Clinton has already reached that threshold. And then if you add in the states in which she is leading, she already hits well over 270. The problem for Donald Trump right now is he is struggling to get Republicans on board, struggling to win Republican-leaning states. Utah has also been competitive, and Mike Pence will be campaigning there tomorrow, which is a real sign of how the campaign is focused on bringing Republicans home. And meanwhile, Hillary Clinton is really focused on expanding her map, competing in places like North Carolina, where she's been leading in a couple of polls as well. Even if Donald Trump wins Florida, it's still an uphill climb for him.
What about issues like Obamacare, Aaron? We're about to see, notices go out apparently the 1st of November, just before Election Day, that a lot of people are going to be seeing those double-digit price increases in Obamacare, that a lot of people are going to have only one insurer to purchase plans from. Is that the kind of issue that could make a difference in an election like this?
Well, I think it would be a really big issue, and it is a big issue. I do think it would be a bigger issue if Donald Trump were able to keep the race focused on this a little bit better. He certainly tried to this morning, but his comments about the whole thing were kind of odd. He gave conflicting signals about whether his employees were on Obamacare, for instance. I think that this is very much like the WikiLeaks Clinton emails that came out. If Trump can really keep
focused on this particular issue, this is something that can really help. I do think, by the way, the presidential race is probably pretty well cemented at this point. Maybe this affects a point or two here or there. I think this is a big thing probably for congressional Republicans as they try to hold on to the Senate and as Democrats have at least some optimism about winning back the House, which I think is still very tough. This is going to be something that's going to be an ad after ad after ad that Democrats voted for the Affordable Care Act. And look what's happening now. And I think that's a very strong argument for them to make going down the stretch here.
Caitlin, what about that? He says a lot of minds are made up. What do you think with 2 weeks to go, 2 weeks from today, people who haven't voted earlier are going to be pulling the levers?
Right. I think it would take a comeback of historic proportions for Donald Trump to be able to defeat Hillary Clinton. I think the goal really and the focus right now is really on those down ballot races, as Aaron mentioned. If Donald Trump can narrow the deficit between himself and Hillary Clinton nationally and in some of these really key battleground states to help some of these down ballot races, I guess the campaign could kind of consider that some kind of a victory. But interestingly enough, the campaign hasn't really been focused on getting support for other Republicans, and kind of picking fights with the establishment and that sort of thing doesn't really help in that effort. And Obamacare is a great example of that, an opportunity, as Aaron mentioned, for Donald Trump to help some of these Republicans get into Congress to make the case that electing them would help to repeal and replace it if that's what they want to do. And he just hasn't really been focused on that.
I want to put up the 2016 electoral scorecard as our Fox News decision desk now sees it. Shows Hillary Clinton with 307 electoral votes right now, either solidly Democratic or leaning Democratic. Donald Trump with only 174, and the trends do not seem to be in his favor. Iowa and a district in Maine that were considered leaning Republican are now considered toss-ups. And even Indiana, Mike Pence's home state, which was in our previous such poll, a solid Republican state, is now only listed as leaning Republican. Aaron, when you look at this map, there's not a lot of good news there for Donald Trump.
No, I mean, the mere fact that we're talking about states like Arizona and Georgia being close to toss-ups, the fact that Texas is somewhat close, if he loses any of those states, this race is over. It's already done. We're also looking at some other red states where we've had some close polls, including, as you mentioned, Indiana, Missouri, Alaska is even polling somewhat close. So this race really, it's kind of redone the political map in some ways, but in a lot of ways, it's just kind of shifted it to the right a little bit, and we're seeing a lot of these red states come into play. So, Trump really needs to shift things in a major way these last 2 weeks. It hasn't happened in recorded history, and we'll see if he has something up his sleeve.
Caitlin, everything I have seen in the polling still indicates that the unfavorable ratings of these two candidates are still about where they were. I mean, they're still about even. If that's the case, why is Hillary Clinton doing so much better now in so many of these states than Trump?
It really is remarkable at this point. I think that the challenge for the Hillary Clinton campaign right now is to really continue to enthuse her voters to come out and support her. If they see that this race is, if there's a large deficit in this race and it looks like she's headed for victory, there are questions about, what kind of effect that could have on turnout. So I was at an early voting location earlier today in Cleveland, and a lot of people there were saying that they were voting early and voting now to kind of ensure that that didn't happen. And the Clinton campaign has been really focused in a lot of these states too on the ground effort and really pinpointing and contacting these voters, and that's something that the Donald Trump campaign hasn't been able to really compete with and hasn't really invested that much in competing with that, and that makes a big difference, especially in the last 2 weeks of a presidential campaign.
And tomorrow, when he could be campaigning, he's apparently going to be opening his new hotel in Washington, which has a lot of eyebrows raised. All right. Aaron Blake from the Washington Post, Caitlin Huey Burns, Real Clear Politics. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Well,
John.
in Washington, D.C. today, one issue sure to be front and center in the remaining days before November 8th is Obamacare. And the White House confirming premiums are expected to increase sharply next year by an average of 25%. Many people will only be able to pick plans from one insurer. Donald Trump jumping on the news saying he will repeal and replace Obamacare if elected. Kevin Corke is live at the White House with more on this now. Kevin?
Hey, Jenna, good day to you. You know, this is actually a story that's been kind of percolating and brewing for quite some time, but I think at least politically speaking, it's finally reached critical mass. I mean, we're talking about the Affordable Care Act in the headlines because the government even admits that, yes, if you have Obamacare, it's going to cost you more, a lot more. Now, the good news is over 11 million people are covered who didn't previously have coverage. But the bad news is those premiums are going to go way up. Now, the Fed says by 25%, but the truth is, in some cases, consumers will pay 60% more, even double. And that's because of the dwindling number of insurance providers and a lower than expected participation rate by healthier, younger consumers. In fact, the president acknowledged the coming price hike just last week in Florida.
An extreme example is Arizona, where we expect benchmark premiums will more than double. Part of this is because Arizona is one of those states that had really low average premiums, among the lowest in the country. So now insurance companies basically are trying to catch up. And they also don't have a lot of competition there.
All right. So his point is higher prices are certainly coming, but that's also because there's not as much competition as there could be out there. And he's looking for more tweaks to Obamacare, and that would take congressional action. But obviously that is not Donald Trump's plan. As you pointed out, Jenna, let me show the folks at home a little tweet that we saw from the GOP presidential nominee. He says, Hillary says it's working, but look what's going on. Premiums are up, out-of-pocket costs are up, your options are down, jobs are down. Overall, he called it a hashtag Obamacare fail.
It's just been announced that Americans are going to experience yet another double-digit spike in your premium for Obamacare, and it doesn't work. Why we have to win on November 8th. Repeal and replace Obamacare. Have to win. We can't go on like this.
Now, as you can well imagine, the White House is still trying to work it out, meaning they want to talk about what to do to keep it moving forward, Jenna. In fact, they're going to have a little event on Facebook coming up today at 2 o'clock. We'll expect to hear from Valerie Jarrett on that. It's clearly, though, up to Congress, the next Congress, and the next occupant of the building behind me to figure out, do you want to fix it or forget it? Jenna?
Not just the presidential races, you rightly point out, Kevin, a lot of down ballot races as well that it can impact this. Kevin, thank you very much. Will newly confirmed problems with Obamacare hurt Democrats' chances in the election? On all parts of the ticket, our live chat is up and running. Just go to foxnews.com/happening now to join the conversation. GOP Vice Presidential nominee Mike Pence praising Democrats and independents who are supporting Donald Trump and telling other Republicans it's time to come home. Let's bring in our panel. Hari Savugan is the former senior spokesman for President Obama's 2008 campaign, the former DNC National Press Secretary, and David Avella is the chairman of GOPAC, a committee that works to elect Republicans to federal and state offices. It's great to have you both. We asked an interesting question in the tease to this segment. David, is it too little, too late to call Republicans home?
No, it's exactly what we should be doing. As Ben Franklin counseled as he signed the Declaration of Independence, we Republicans must hang together or we most assuredly will hang separately. And if Mike Pence communicates that message, but let me say this as well. If Donald Trump were ever going to pledge his fortune to buy the advertising to get around the media and communicate what he wants to do as president, which will bring Republicans home, now's the time to do it.
We'll see if he does it. I think he's opening a hotel tomorrow. So that's one of the things that we'll watch for. Hari, you know, it is interesting when you look at polling. Donald Trump really doesn't have all the Republicans. Like Hillary Clinton tends to have a lot of Democrats. Donald Trump is still polling lower amongst Republicans. He does have independents, though. So if he's able to galvanize the Republicans that have been a little bit timid towards him, what do you think that could mean for the election?
Well, the question here is, what do they have to come home to? I mean, Donald Trump, with Mike Pence's help, has burned down the House. This is a candidate who's attacked the foundation of democracy. Why would you want to come home to that? This is a candidate who's attacked religious minorities. Why would you want to come home to that? This is a candidate that has bragged about sexually assaulting women. Why would you want to come home to that?
So interesting. So you say, Hari, it's really the way that Mike Pence is defining this, saying you can't, you're not voting for Hillary Clinton, come home to us. But you said the message would be stronger if they defined who the GOP is today?
Yeah, but that's the problem. They haven't been defining that. I mean, Donald Trump the other day had what he called a major policy speech. He led off that speech by threatening to sue women who had claimed that he had sexually assaulted them. There is no defining message for the GOP other than Donald Trump. It has been a candidacy of his personality, and his personality is turning everybody off.
David, I'm curious what you think about what Hari has to say, and also what the very conservative columnist Bret Stephens wrote in the Wall Street Journal today that sounds very familiar to what Hari is saying right now. He says this: I don't see the point of belonging to a party on the increasingly dubious assumption that it's slightly less bad than the opposition. If I can't get my grand old party back, I'd rather help build a new one. What do you think about that, David?
There are three reasons for Republicans to turn out this cycle. One, it's to elect Donald Trump. Two, it's to defeat Hillary Clinton. Or three, it's to support Republicans up and down the ballot. Look, the reality is thousands of Republicans are going to get elected in 2 weeks. And those individuals that get elected are going to do more to define who the Republican Party is and what policies that they champion than anything. But to Hari's point, the reason to vote for the Republican ticket is because the alternative is Hillary Clinton, who has proved inept at foreign policy, wants to increase taxes. She has talked about that. Wants to continue the health care system that we currently have and only expand on it, which are all the things that have the American economy as sluggish at 3% as it has been in over a decade, and hence why you see Americans struggling every day because there aren't the good paying jobs to move to get to. The economy is sluggish, and they're all concerned about their personal safety. Now, if you want to continue those policies, you vote for Hillary Clinton, which is what she has advocated for 30 years.
Okay, so you both have a long list of why you shouldn't vote for the either candidate, and you're both very good at it at this point in the campaign season, I must say, as I pay a compliment to both of you. Hari, I am curious what you think about what David had to say when it comes to the undecideds, because that's something we have on repeat, right? It's all about the undecideds. Often it's about the independents, and I did mention in multiple polls, it looks like the independents are going to Donald Trump. So what about that?
Yeah. Well, look, I think those polls have shifted, and there's actually, and we're pretty close in it, the independent number. But let's think about where we are. We're 2 weeks out from an election, and Mike Pence and Donald Trump are talking about getting their base. They're not talking about undecided voters yet. They're still talking about getting their base. At the same time, Democrats are really energized. We look at the numbers coming in from Texas today. Harris County, which is where Houston is up 40% in early vote. Dallas County is up 80%. Travis County, where Austin is up 100% in early vote. Democratic ballots in the state of Utah are up 33% from this time in 2012. Democrats are energized. So even if Donald Trump is able to hold on to his margin, a very small margin with independents, the numbers just aren't there.
Okay, quick final thought from me, David, because we're going to talk about Texas next. So just weigh in on that. What about Hari's point that turnout and enthusiasm seem to be up across the board? It's not just for Donald Trump.
We're going to find out on Election Day, but the polls, just because a poll comes out today is suggesting it's close, doesn't mean in the final assessment that Texas goes Democrat. That would be astounding if it did. That states like Georgia, which Hari and the Democrats always talk about putting in the Democrat column, but consistently vote Republican. Same for Arizona. So, look, a lot's going to happen in these next 2 weeks. And getting back to our first point, the best thing Donald Trump can do right now to help his cause is get advertising up that's going to tell Republicans and independents and like-minded Democrats what he wants to do to move this country forward. And as we know from history, voters do shift in these final 2 weeks if they haven't already cast their vote.
Well, if the World Series teaches us anything, it's that anything can happen, right? Cubs and Indians. There you go.
Right.
So we'll see. We'll see what here goes from here. All right, David, great to have you both. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jenna.
Woman at the center of a discredited Rolling Stone article, she's known as Jackie, testifying that some details of her alleged sexual assault are foggy because she has post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. As a former University of Virginia assistant dean mentioned in that story is suing Rolling Stone for defamation. She claims the writer, Sabrina Erdely, portrayed her as the villain of that story. Let's bring in Lise Wheel, Fox News legal analyst, and Wendy Patrick, a veteran prosecutor and trial attorney. Now, this woman, Jackie, who was the centerpiece of this now discredited article, she is not being sued, at least not yet, and probably never. But can claiming PTSD, can that somehow absolve her of her role in this whole fiasco?
Well, again, as you said, she's not being sued yet, so she's not really a part of this. But it may down the road. Right now, we're looking at the assistant dean, who's saying that she's been defamed. The court has ruled that she is a quasi-public figure because she's put herself out there to the public, which makes it harder for her to sue because the standard now is higher for her. You've got to actually prove defamation. You've got to prove that she's a public figure, so there was actual malice against her, which makes it a harder standard of proof against her going forward. That they went after her, they attacked her name, they attacked the University of Virginia. It makes it harder for that the harder burden of proof against the Rolling Stones.
She was asked, this woman Jackie was asked in this video deposition how she felt about then Dean Aramo, Nicole Aramo, right, the woman who is suing, and she said she did what an advocate is supposed to do and helped me. That would seem to go a long way toward helping this woman prove her case.
You know, it sure does. And part of the relevance, John, of what we heard today regarding the deposition of the victim, Jackie in this case, you know, like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a videotape is priceless. In other words, the jurors got to both see and hear a woman whose credibility is key to this defamation case, even though she's not on trial, nor is she the victim on trial. It's not a sexual assault case. We live in a day and age of what I'll call cultural climate change. You hear allegations of rape culture, of campus sexual misconduct, and it's within that context that this article was written with the terrible things that were said about Dean Aramo. So I think the victim's testimony helps in a sense really kind of bolster the fact that she wasn't the person this article made her out to be.
And Jackie apparently said time and time again on the stand that she couldn't remember things, didn't know things about, you know, the events that that ended up in this article.
But that can also be understandable. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, nor are you, but it can also be understandable, can it, though, if you're so traumatized by something that you might not remember it, though. You might not remember it in that moment, that it actually makes it more believable that you don't remember it.
She said, I stand by the account I gave to Rolling Stone. I believed it to be true at the time.
What's troublesome about that, John, is she also stands by the account she gave to Dean Aramo, and those are two different stories.
Right.
So if we were to look at the instances and certainly sexual assault is highly traumatizing, could very well lead to PTSD, but did it in this case? If it had, perhaps we wouldn't have had the divergent stories at the beginning. That's the legal argument that's in play during this trial.
Yeah, we'll let our viewers know what happens. It's expected to go on for another few days, this trial. Wendy Patrick, Lise Wheel. Thanks,
John.
A 6-year-old girl from Pakistan getting a chance for potentially life-changing surgery. The U.S. Embassy in Islamabad issued her a last-minute visa. Her father has campaigned for nearly 4 years trying to get treatment for his daughter, who suffers from a genetic disorder affecting her spinal cord. The girl's parents will accompany her to a children's hospital in Wilmington, Delaware, but has agreed to do the surgery she needs for free.
Well, some new recommendations for parents of infants. Pediatricians say newborns should sleep in the same room as their parents to reduce the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. The guidelines recommend sleeping in the same room for at least 6 months, maybe even longer. And doctors say babies should be in a separate crib. Infants should be placed on their backs on a firm surface with tight sheets. Those cribs, again, should be empty. Again, babies should sleep on a separate surface from their parents. For more on these new guidelines, let's bring in Dr. Lori Feldman-Winter, a co-author of the American Academy of Pediatrics Guidelines and a pediatrics researcher at Cooper Medical School of Rowan University in Camden, New Jersey. It's nice to have you, doctor, on the program. I'm sure our viewers have heard about these new guidelines over the last 24 hours, specifically the big headline about having your infant in the same room with you for at least 6 months, maybe even for the first year. I've heard very few news reports, though, explain the why researchers think this is a good idea. Can you tell our viewers why that's recommended?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for having me.
So we know that sleep arrangement where we recommend room sharing but not bed sharing can reduce the risk of SIDS by as much as 50%. And we think some of the reason why, and no one has proven exactly what this reason is that the mothers and their infants actually have a different sleep state when they're together. So they may sleep a little less soundly, and just that kind of sleep architecture may actually be protective against a really sound sleep that may be one of the risk factors for having SIDS. In addition, we know that room sharing facilitates continued breastfeeding, and breastfeeding, we know, is one of the recommendations that dramatically reduces the risk of SIDS. In fact, the more a mother breastfeeds, the longer she breastfeeds, the reductions can be as much as 70%.
We're seeing all these cute images of newborn babies on the screen, and I'm sure our viewers that are parents, all you want to do is protect your children, and so you'll do anything that you can. And I'm just wondering if the recommendation is to sleep next to your child during the night. Is that the same recommendation for nap time as well?
Yes, so we don't really distinguish the sleep. We say that infants should be placed supine or back to sleep for every sleep. And in fact, when the recommendations were first made, this was being done at the nighttime sleep, but we started seeing that many of the residual cases of SIDS were occurring during daytime and in daycare settings and other settings or childcare settings. And so the recommendations about sleep are really for sleep throughout the day. And so if a baby is placed to sleep, they should be placed in an environment that is sharing a room with the adult, but not sharing the same sleep surface. A particularly hazardous arrangement is when a baby is in the hands of an adult and then the adult and the baby fall asleep on a couch or a sofa or an armchair. And so we don't recommend that sleep arrangement in particular for infants.
And as a mom of a 6-month-old, I mean, it's certainly easy to do that, especially when you're so sleep deprived and you're just, you're trying to rock that baby to sleep. It is easy to do that. So it's a good reminder. As a parent, though, you're told so many different things over the years. 20 years ago, you're told to put the baby on the stomach. Now we're told to put the baby on the back, but that if the baby slips, turns over on their stomach, to leave them because it's okay. And so it leads to kind of a natural question about the research, doctor, I'm hoping that you can address. Because again, we just want the best thing for our kids. But can we really trust this research when so much has changed over the last several decades about what to do with our children?
So one of the new things that we did for this statement was actually identify what the levels of evidence are. And we categorize that level of evidence based on the kinds of studies that we used. We have over 400 publications just alone in the technical report that really give us the information. Many of the studies are really combinations of studies, or what we call meta-analyses. So they're really groups of studies that are all pooled together where we can really have a higher level of evidence to make these recommendations.
When he's trying to get them out to the polls now, in many states, people are doing early voting or on election day.
Washington Post and New York Times are both out today with articles that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are going to be pushing Hillary Clinton with a more leftward agenda, assuming she wins the White House. How do you see those articles? How do you see those pushes affecting voters when they go to the booth? Let's start with you, Annie.
Hi, yeah, I was out with Elizabeth yesterday as well in New Hampshire, and the left is particularly energized this year. I mean, they feel that this election is almost over, and they are not going to give Hillary Clinton much of a honeymoon. I mean, they're ready to continue to keep pressure on her the day after the election. And so, how is that going to affect voters? I mean, I think the voters I was talking to yesterday in New Hampshire were just, excited Democrats, and they were happy to have their party.
In the meantime, we have to show you our show animation because it has our names on it. That's very important. The race to the White House now in the home stretch with Election Day exactly 2 weeks from today. Good morning to you. I'm John Scott.
Here we are, 2 weeks. 2 weeks, everybody.
It's been a long, strange road.
It has certainly been, and there's a lot more to watch in the next 14 days.
To the Democrats now. They are out in full force in several battlegrounds today. As we mentioned, Hillary Clinton also in the Sunshine State of Florida, holding a rally in Coconut Creek this afternoon. But getting underway now in North Carolina, where his wife holds a very slim lead. Bill Clinton is holding an early voting event in Rocky Mount. Joe Biden will soon be appearing at a rally at Chatham University in Pennsylvania. That taking place just minutes from now. Joining us now, Eliana Johnson, Washington editor of the National Review, and Annie Linsky, national political reporter for the Boston Globe. When you hear that list of names of luminaries, really, Annie, that's the advantage for Hillary Clinton. But then some of the states in yellow are the toss-ups, places like Colorado, North Carolina, Virginia, even Pennsylvania and Michigan. That is what Trump predicts as the electoral map right now. How do you see his prediction?
His predictions are really interesting, John, in that some of the toss-up states he has on there, I would put Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Colorado. Most polls do not show those states still being competitive. Hillary Clinton has led in every recent poll of those states, and so I would not count those as toss-up states. I would actually say those states lean Democratic. I think he also has Virginia as a toss-up state. So, and I think the Fox electoral map also has those as leaning Democratic. So I think the Trump map, not surprisingly, is incredibly charitable to him, and it's not very likely to pan out like that on Election Day.
Annie, what do you think about this map? Is he looking at this map through rose or red colored glasses?
It's not a map that the polling supports. I mean, look, we're looking at a situation where Hillary Clinton has expanded her map so broadly that Utah is on the map. And even, you know, and this is absurd, but even Texas, she's only 2 or 3 points down. So I think it's a little bit difficult to see the path that Donald Trump is laying out as reasonable or realistic.
That said, he is promising that this election is going to be a whole lot closer than most people suggest, and he's going to win states, Eliana, that people don't think he's going to win.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. He's been saying that he's really has some contradictory messages that to me have been confusing. On the one hand, he's saying that the election is rigged against him, and on the other hand, he's saying that he's going to surprise people and come out of nowhere and win states that the polls really show him having no chances of winning. So I'm not sure how Trump reconciles these two messages in his mind, or how he actually expects voters to reconcile them in their mind.
The team Clinton has this time around, they can send Joe Biden, they can send Bill Clinton, they can send people like Elizabeth Warren, whom we saw yesterday, to some of those states to really try to drum up Democratic support.
Yeah, that's right. And add Michelle Obama to that list.
Sure.
Yeah,
you can
she
add
has
President Obama. You can add the most powerful man in the world to that list if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, that is her big advantage. She has this huge amount of surrogates. I was talking to Brian Fallon, her press secretary, out at the debate, and they pointed out that they can have a surrogate in every single swing state on every single day. So it's a real force multiplier for her campaign.
Eliana, Donald Trump is out with his own electoral map, and I want to put it on screen so our viewers can take it in. He suggests that he is not going to have any problems in some of those states. Well, the red states are the Trump states. He suggests that Arizona, Georgia, South Carolina, not going to be a problem for him. The blue states, you can clearly see that he expects will go